evening keynote. I see that our numbers have swelled considerably, so I would like to issue a special welcome to those who are not here for the first session. Understandably, I would say there's more interest in Professor Marion than in some loaded graduate students, but we were discussing consultant topics, so that has to make up for it to some degree. So in order to introduce Professor Marion this evening, I would like to welcome Tarek Dika, who's an assistant professor here at Notre Dame in the program of liberal studies.
Welcome everybody to Notre Dame. I'll just begin this introduction. Jean-Luc Marion is the author of over 20 books on the history of early modern philosophy, phenomenology, and Catholic theology. Needless to say, his work in each of these areas has been transformative. Trained by the finest historians of philosophy and phenomenologists in France of the latter half of the 20th century, including Ferdinand Quiet, Emmanuel Levinas, and Jacques Derrida, the secondary literature on Marion's oeuvre continues to grow. His books on Descartes, beginning with Descartes' Great Ontology, published in 1975, and ending with On Passive Thought in Descartes, published in 2013, are groundbreaking and are standard references in both France and the United States. His work in Catholic theology, including Idle and Distance, 1977, and God Without Being, 1982, as well as Phenomenology, above all, his well-known magnum opus, Being Given, Toward a Phenomenology of Givenness, published in 1997, have already become enduring historical achievements. It is an honor and great pleasure to introduce him this evening. Since the 70s, Marion's work has been consistently informed by an historiographical concern to interrogate the history of metaphysics, which Marion, following Heidegger, defines in terms of the relation between common or created being and the highest being, or God. On this historically well-attested definition of metaphysics, being grounds all beings, including God, insofar as they are, in one sense or another, while the highest being grounds all beings as their cause. For Marion, on this definition, as I understand him, the history of metaphysics comes to an end with Nietzsche. Thus, in one of Marion's most famous essays, Metaphysics and Phenomenology, A Relief for Theology, published in 1993, he raises the following questions, paraphrasing Nietzsche, and I quote, "Why would beings as such necessitate that another being overdetermine them as their ground? Why would what is have to be given a further ground instead of answering for itself by itself alone? Nothing can become ground, since nothing calls for or necessitates a ground." If these questions are legitimate, then metaphysics, in its historical sense, has indeed come to an end, for it is not clear that what today goes by the name of metaphysics designates a well-defined field of inquiry. In any case, Marion draws out the theological significance of the end of metaphysics by concluding, and I quote, "If the figure of the ground no longer allows us to legitimate the concept of metaphysics in general, it follows that the assimilation of God to the function of ultimate ground in particular becomes, or can become, illegitimate," unquote. God, of course, remains, but the determination ground disappears, or is at least declined. At issue, Marion writes, is not denying any greatness to this determination of the divine by the efficiency of the ground, nor is it a matter of underestimating its theoretical fecundity. It is simply a matter of honestly posing this question: does the effectivity of the ground really allow us to think the way in which God is God, even in philosophy? Do causa sui, sufficient reason, purus actus, or energeia offer a sufficiently divine name to make God appear, unquote. For Marion, The modern metaphysics of subjectivity does not overcome the problem of God's mode of appearance. On the contrary, it exacerbates the problem. In his writings on Kant and Husserl, Marion again and again insists that there are no a priori conditions, be they theoretical or moral, to which phenomena, up to and including the revelation of God, must conform. For example, reading Kant's Religion Within the Limits of Reason Alone, Marion writes, and I quote, "Revelation will be reduced to an imperative, hence to the moral law, or it will founder outside of all reason, hence outside of all possibility. In either case, it disappears as such," unquote. Far from being the inert object of phenomenology, revelation in fact provides phenomenology with an opportunity to expand its borders so as to accommodate possibilities it would otherwise diminish or completely exclude. As Marion puts it in Being Given, one should not erase or disfigure the possibility of revelation. Rather, one should, and I quote again, redefine the transcendental conditions of manifestation in order to admit the possibility of a phenomenon of revelation. These words speak directly to the hospitality of phenomenological reason as Marion conceives it, according to a concept of reason which is neither metaphysical nor transcendental. A member of the Académie Française since 2008, Jean-Luc Marion is currently Professor Emeritus at the University of Paris IV-Sorbonne, Dominique Duval Chair of Philosophy at the Institut Catholique de Paris, and Greeley Professor of the Philosophy of Religions and Theology at the University of Chicago. Today he will be speaking on phenomenology and the common good. Please join me in warmly welcoming Jean-Luc Marion.
Thank you very much for this introduction. It is a pleasure to meet once more time Tarek Dika, with whom I have had very exciting discussions. I thank very much the University Notre Dame for this invitation. I thank you. I thank Yulia Tutserova for translating my the first draft of this lecture. I have to point out that it is very rare in my work to address political questions. This is one of the first times. So forgive me if I am not exactly on the right track time to time. So I am an amateur in this field. My question is not about the common good. It is about the reason why the question of the common good has resurfaced recently. Because there is many reasons why this question should have remained buried in the churchyards of the Begriffsgeschichte. And why is it now reappearing, and in a rather stronger way, against all odds? It's that question I want to address. First point, Nietzsche has warned nihilism stands at the door. In fact, no. Today, nihilism does not remain on the threshold, but rather, for over a century, has invaded the whole house with doors wide open. It is no longer a ghost whose absence haunts us, but rather the very air that we breathe, the atmosphere which poisons us, the whirlwind which suck us up. We do not call it by its name. It is unseen. It remains without figure. But its symptoms may be spotted everywhere. Inexplicable, irresistible, absurdly logical. For instance, the atomic threat, the ecological catastrophe, the terrorist cancer, the indistinction between peace and war, between dictatorship and democracy, between the rights of human beings, in one word, please, and barbarism, and encompassing everything else, the death of God, with the erasure of the human being which will follow. How has it, nihilism, managed to engulf everything? Nietzsche explained it as follows, quote, "What does nihilism mean? That the highest values are devaluated. But make no mistake, the highest values were not devaluated because they lose their value as if by an evil magic, but rather because all of a sudden we realize that they consist in nothing but this, their value, great or small, increasing or decreasing, it does not matter. It does not matter indeed, since all value depends first on the evaluation and possesses no value in itself. By definition, value never has any value, either by itself or in itself, since it entirely depends on the evaluation, more essential to it than its own value itself. There is no value but that of exchange, variable and unstable, alienated from the quote which sets it from day to day. The economy rests upon the possibility of abstraction, which reduces all things to money, to currency, and thus equates that which has nothing in common in reality. Wherefrom the possibility of universal exchange. But more essentially, this equivalence rests upon estimation and evaluation, which assign valorization to an abstract things by means of an evaluation coming from the outside. All value depends on its evaluator, such that there is nothing that value itself can do in this process. Everything may gain value or lose it for the same reason. People have speculated and ruined themselves for spices and tulip in Netherlands, 17th century, as well as human beings reduced to slavery or to evaluated objects. This is not so much a matter of financialization of the economy, but rather the evaluation of the totality of things in the world, of which financialization constitutes only a particular figure. In itself, value does not have any in itself. Value, the residue of a thing alienated from itself, results entirely from the evaluator, and the latter limits oneself to obeying the totalizing logic of evaluation, whose worker he or she becomes. Value is worth nothing except that which terminates the evaluation at a given moment. It is thus understood that calling something a value indicates that it is produced, mastered, and dominated just because it is decided without any recourse to that something. Qualifying something as a value amounts to disqualifying it as such. For example, speaking of the true, the good, and the beautiful as values amounts to disqualifying them as such. Speaking, among other things, being human beings and truths have values reduces them to the indignity of simple, insignificant words. Finally, speaking of God as a value results in enormous blasphemy. One is surprised to hear the political class proclaiming that it fights for its values. For if liberty, equality, and brotherhood fall down to the rank of the value of the Republic, they already no longer constitute anything in themselves, but rather evaporate in smoke, look-like slogans which some chant and others boo. One might reply, in the hope of tearing oneself away from all value in nihilism, that at least its reality in itself, which the thing loses in becoming value, passes over to the evaluation, thus to the evaluator. The evaluator, who appreciates or depreciates, concentrates in him, at least hopefully, the power of evaluation, which has no price, since it sets them all. And in having no price, he sets himself as the only and universal treasure of all valorization. That is a formulation by Nietzsche. And certainly, the master of all stock exchanges reason in the following manner. Value-free, because they evaluate everything, they claim to confiscate for themselves all the reality which they strip from things. The evaluator, or better still, the evaluation itself, then takes on the role of the only reality in itself. Indeed, of the supreme being, totalizing the entire reality which the values have lost in conformity with the principle of this transfer. And Nietzsche thought of it this way under the name of the will to power. Yes, but such a will to power does not, for all that, escape nihilism as well. For what does it desire when it evaluates? It desires all things, without a doubt, insofar as it reduces everything to a value, and thus to nothing in itself. In this way, it desires nothing in particular apart from, universally, the exercise of evaluation itself in every evaluated and devaluated value. In short, the will to power desires none other than its very will to evaluate or devalue. It evaluates none other than its lone will to evaluate. This will desire final accumulation of capital, the only thinkable capital, the will itself. The will to power desires none other than its rise to a power abstract from all being and even from all particular evaluation. This will to power desires nothing but to demultiply itself, literally to raise itself to the nth power. It has been a long time since it has desired anything of being, of real and precise, other than its own growth. What we call growth today, and what we invoke under that sacred name, no longer pertains to the growth of any particular thing, for neither financial capital, nor economic production, nor military armament, nor technical development constitute the end of such a growth, but only it means, or metonymies. Growth becomes an empty name for the process of evaluation itself, namely the process of the annihilation of everything by its reduction to a value. The will to power annihilates everything into so many values only because it desires nothing but itself, or rather, at lost all self for the sake of its ascent in power itself. We have seen that we are not confronted with any crisis, but that we are rather trapped in a decadence without visible end. The reason for this decadence consists precisely in the fact that the will to power has no longer desires anything, that it can do nothing but repeat itself in an eternal return to the same, in a growth of the same annihilating evaluation. For the will to power is able of everything, but does not desire anything anymore. Like terrorism, which is its privileged figure, it can do nothing but desire itself and reject the rest in this very desire. Ceaseless and purposeless nothing. Nietzsche has prefaced the definition of nihilism, which we have referred to, by the following words. Quote, nihilism, normal state, and normal is emphasized. Nihilism, normal state. Nihilism, it lacks purpose, it lacks an answer to the why, to the warum. No Antwort für warum. Therein lies a problem for all of us, and not only, nor firstly for Christians. We no longer have a purpose which answers to the question of why, because nihilism forbids us this question and exempts us from it. Persisting in itself without being able to do anything but its own will, to desire its own will, that is the ultima ratio rerum. Far from accomplishing the will of a human being, this causa sui renders the human being a slave of his worst master, himself or herself. In other words, it is necessary to desire without desiring oneself, without only desiring oneself while rejecting all that one desires and absorbing it in a simple evaluation. This, a non-autistic will, which desires something else, somewhere else, who might be able to achieve it? The one who succeeds in desiring something other than that which he, his, or her own will chooses, who anticipates and evaluates it from itself and for itself, the one who might desire in a different mode than that of evaluating wills increased to power, closed and empty, finally the only who might utter and accomplish otherwise a will other than his own, who might say, quote, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. Matthew chapter 26. Or Mark chapter 14. Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. Or Luke chapter 22. Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. In order to desire otherwise than desiring the power to power, the will of the will, it is necessary to desire something other than what my will to power desire. Desiring another will, which would neither be mine nor my own. This means desiring a will which does not come from me, because it comes before me and from elsewhere. In other words, it means desiring the will of the Father. The Father, the one who precedes me and comes to me from somewhere else. The act which characterized Jesus as such, as the saint of God, marked by the unction as the Christ, consists entirely and only in this displacement of the will, which breaks the circle of the repetition of the one and the same, of persistence in the affirmation of the self alone, or of the lone self, in order to desire that which is neither the self nor its own, that which does not extend to the same. Desiring the will of an other, of an another who precedes me and from whom I proceed, this opens up the only way which exempts me from remaining closed in myself, which relieves me from annihilating everything else in one of my evaluation, which breaks the globes of totality by a totalization of values, a globe all the more closed since it swells and repeats itself. The only one who is able of extricating oneself from nihilism is the one who, in imitating Christ, succeeds in not desiring its own will of will, in order to desire otherwise and from elsewhere. This radical reversal might also be formulated following another paradox promulgated by Christ in the Gospel. Matthew chapter 10. Whoever finds whoever finds their life will lose it. And whoever loses their life for my sake, will find it. Or else, Luke chapter 9, for whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake, he is the one who will save it. End of quote. Of course, this paradox calls for spiritual and theological interpretation. Yet, one might, and without a doubt one must, first understand it philosophically as a frank and frontal break with one of the most fundamental principles of metaphysics, if not the most fundamental. According to metaphysics, that is in fact to the natural attitude of ordinary consciousness, living amounts to being, and being equates with remaining in the present without either losing oneself in the past or expecting an uncertain future. Then being or remaining in the present mean persisting in presence in order to preserve there, as far as possible, one's being in the mode of persevering persistence, to preserve oneself identically to oneself within the endurance of presence. The will of will evaluates, reduces things to its evaluations, only for this sole purpose to repeat itself, to continue in such a way that, even and above all in the midst of becoming, my will is always to be found there, embedded there in the same state, ceaseless, equal, or almost to itself. It is not insensate to accumulate its power only to remain almost equal to itself, for here, that which does not increase diminishes. But, as we have seen, this persistence created by power produces the nothing, since it first reduces that which it desires to its own values and then annihilates itself by locking itself up within its own repetition. This is why, at least as sensed by those who listen to Christ, that this is why there is but one remaining way toward liberty, no longer desiring in order to persist in one's being, but rather desiring an other will, and thus accepting to will from elsewhere on the basis of a will which comes to me from elsewhere. That is, from the other will, that of the Father. That which gives being, because it creates it. Here it is necessary to transcend what I desire, which implies transcending the I desire itself, such as binds the I to its own will for power and imprisons it in its value. Here opens the Christian path towards the way out of nihilism, where metaphysics is fulfilled. And it is here, only here, that the question of the common good can finally be asked. The common good remains the great absentee of the so-called democratic and enlightened societies. For on the rare occasion where it invoked, restore to the rank without honor of the value of the Republic of the South of France. I'm quoting a speech of our President of France, now reigning, if I may say so. He has quoted once the common good, and he referred to the common good among the value of the Republic and the soul of France. But it's a bit surprising because he has no idea of what a soul is. And as we have seen, value is a nihilistic formulation, which is much less appropriate to any attempt to give us more robust hope in the future. So, the common good is seen among the political class as equivalent to the general will. But as the general will sunk into the role of an empty ideal, it is the same for the common good. Yet the common good never results from the sum of particular goods into an inconceivable general compromise. It consists in nothing other than itself, for the communion which its implements constitutes a good in itself. The communal experience of the good, which surpasses the formal opposition in which ordinary political philosophy is caught up, already constitutes a good, because it creates communion. Communion allows and elicits the community as the first good, a bonum nullius, a good which belongs to no one and can thus render itself accessible to all, to one and all. The concept of the common good becomes intelligible only if one recovers the distinction formalized by Gaston Fessard. In fact, Fessard discerned several levels of them, for if all pooling is a good, all pooling do not implement the same good. First of all, there is the good of the community, the common good politically defined, which open access to goods to everyone, not those of each one, private property, but collective ones, the good of subsistence, ownership of the means of production, appropriation of the political rights, and so on. Next comes the community of the good, which assures unlimited sharing in all possible goods, liberties, culture, and so on, to all that the community and not the individuals may render accessible. Here, the community itself becomes a source of its own good. And third, finally, once the two first functions, the good of the community objective and the community of good subjective, are established, the goods, in reciprocating each other, attain the good of communion itself, from which they rightly proceed rather than result. The community of common goods then culminate and is rooted in the experience of the good of community, in other words, of communion. In this way, the formulation given by Leo XIII is validated. The common good consists, I quote, after God in society, the first and last law. The common good does not result from a strictly political approach because it leads to a good wherein a community discovered itself to be much more than a political community, a communion, at least in sketch, but already in reality. From there on out, it becomes possible to infer a final conclusion, explicitly theological. The common good, as the experience of communion itself, can and must be conceived in relation to the love of God, according to a reciprocal bound. In one sense, love towards God remains an illusion so long as it does not first attest itself in the good of communion. The experience of communion is a sense of mutual, non-political love, offers the only effective verification of the experience of our supposed love of God. I quote the first epistle by John, chapter 3. We know that we have come to know him, God, if we keep his commands. Whoever says, I know him, but does not do what he commands is a liar, and the truth is not in that person. Anyone who claims to be in the light but hates a brother or sister is still in the darkness. End of quote. In the absence of any possible empirical verification in the absence of this empirical verification of communion among human beings, the love of God would remain an empty concept without intuition, an illusion of a concept, probably a lie. Quote, first epistle to John, chapter 4. If someone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar. For the one who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. End of quote. We can truly know whether we love God only to the degree that we are able to prove that we love our neighbor. In this sense, the common good appears as an indication, a test, a place of the Trinitarian experience of God. But in another sense, it should also be said that we are only able of accomplishing the common good in its plenary meaning of the good of the communion on the basis of its immediately perfect accomplishment in God itself. Quote of 1 John, by John, chapter 4. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. And everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. The only, end of quote, it is only because communion is already for us and eternally for God, accomplished within the Trinity and trinitarily manifested by Christ, that we have the right to claim to implement it in the common good. The good of the communion would not stand any chance if it did not look ahead to the already accomplished Trinitarian love. Or rather, we would only be able to aspire in the present moment towards some empirical and therefore imperfect realization of the common good in virtue and in the name of its Trinitarian perfection in God. The historical common good turns out to be gauged by the eternally accomplished Trinitarian communion. The common good offers the only empirical verification of our love of God, but the love of God in itself and for us turns out to be the effective condition of the possibility for us of accomplishing, at least partially, the common good, as the good of the communion. The common good results neither from our initiative nor from our own resources, but from a universal which precedes us and which it remains for us to receive as universal and Catholic citizen. In this way, Christians would invoke a political model which is non-political at its core, that is, that of community which is not based upon common interest, because whatever such may be, they inevitably lead to an exclusive affirmation of identity. A community which aims at communion because, in fact, it proceeds from it. The union of community does not come to it from itself, but it comes to it from the communion which it first sees relies in God, which it hopes it's subsequently realizable among common beings as well. The doctrine of the common good, which stems directly from the definition of the political community in terms of Trinitarian communion, thus perfectly confirms the political originality of Christians. And I quote the epistle to Emeritus, chapter 5. The astonishing constitution of their citizenship, the Christian, Thomaste katastasis tes eoton politeias, which all acknowledge to be indeed paradoxical, homologumenos paradoxos. Once again, one must remain wary of classifying Christianity as no more than one of the monotheism. For Christ reveals that divine unity is based, even more so than on the unity of the only God, on the communion of love within him. Yet this communion can only occur between persons, since love always loves someone other than the self, even when this self eternally remains and becomes itself. At the same time, it is understood, or should be understood, that the debate about autonomy and heteronomy, not only in morals but also in politics, lacks any pertinence. Let us take, for example, the so-called, quote, virtuous atheist. This position so widely spread among public moralists and intellectuals who take it up not without pretentiousness. We have all the Christian virtues without believing in Christ, and object that they do not need any motivation exterior to consciousness in order to be determined to act morally. And in fact, why not? But for all that, this absence of external norm does not render autonomy possible, for the moral law itself imposes itself on my consciousness only because it comes to me from elsewhere. Even supposing that it has no religious origin, it only applies to me as a call, a demand, an election, and therefore literally as another norm. In short, one must choose between Sade and Levinas, for the other imposes that which he or she demands on me, and he or her claim applies indeed a norm coming from elsewhere, as immanent and even silent as it is supposed to be. All moral virtue supposes an internal alterity, where my decision is referred to some other than myself, precisely an other. Reciprocally, since In the political society, community comes from communion, and communion is only realized within God. It is not possible for all that to speak of heteronomy, of a theological-political constitution contrary to the separation of power. For the Trinitarian communion does not impose anything upon the political community, but rather offers the possibility of constituting itself in reference to that which is effectively accomplished elsewhere. We will only become a community in communion with others, and this communion can only come to us from elsewhere. Otherwise, we would already be there. Can such a non-political model of political community become credible and thus possible? In fact, it does not seem right to ask the question in those terms, for we still presuppose that today we already possess another model, reliable, proven, whose future is assured. In this way, we presuppose that which appears to be massively doubtful and questionable, the fact that the political reality is able of understanding itself on the basis of economics. Today, since we are speaking of democracy, we dogmatically identify the political actor with the economical actor. The citizen is the producer, the latter doubling as a consumer. If we fight against poverty, it is most often in order to institute or to preserve democracy, for fear that too much poverty might deprive a number of citizens of the role of political actors and divert them toward populism. We force ourselves to believe that the market regulates the political life well and correctly, all the while suspecting that the empire of banks and rating agencies need to be firmly regulated. Yet, it is the bound which is disintegrating under our very eyes and which elicits anxiety. Is it enough to define democracy by trusting, as if a dogma, the identity of the political actor with the economic actor? Apparently not, as long as we notice the gaps which separate those two terms. In this way, we have learned that economic growth does not have a direct effect on the reduction of unemployment, that there is no direct link between global enrichment, PNB or PIB, and the expansion of public freedoms or of the political capacity. Growth may be compatible with an increase in unemployment, indeed, of its institution at the rate of a more rapid increase of productivity. We notice as well that the political debate does not increase in the direct proportion to the outpouring of the media, which de facto does not always result in the best democratic discussion, but may stifle it. We must acknowledge as well that globalized capitalism can prosper in an authoritarian or even dictatorial society, and that the new dragons are taken on the semblance of demo-dictatorship. We have created this word, at least in French, démocrature. Démocrature, which is a combination of democracy and dictature. Those 3 points, the non-coincidence of global wealth and individual revenues, the disconnection between economic performance and democratic level, and finally, the deficit of democratic representativeness provoked by the power of the media, constitute so many clear and worrying indications that it is necessary to question the soundness of the identification of the citizen with the economic agent. the questioning may be endured and sought. What would it mean to escape from the cult of economic infrastructure without thinking, for all that, into a vain utopia or an ideological delirium? Without a doubt, challenging the principle laid down by Locke for the purpose of economically defining the atomized individual and thus the citizen member of the political community. I quote Locke. It is evident, although things of nature are given in common, the human being, because he or she is his or her own master and owner of his own or her own person and of the action and labor of this same person, the human being nevertheless contains the great foundation of property within him or herself. That is the second treatise on government, section 44. In this way, the great foundation of property would be located within the human being itself, because the latter is defined as the owner not only of his or her action, of his or her labor and the fruit thereof, but first of all of his or herself. I am able of appropriating things which nature has nevertheless originally given to all, because I am originally my own owner. My identity to myself would rest in my appropriation of myself. Thus, suspending economy as an unreal and unrealistic superstructure would mean the following: challenging the notion that the human being sets itself up as an owner of its own person and develop him or herself by means of exchange and reciprocity. In other words, seriously considering the possibility that desiring to preserve and to preserve oneself leads to loss, that only the one who is given does not lose him or herself, that the one who possesses life loses it. The appropriation, which allows and demands exchange and requires reciprocity, is opposed to the gift, which frees itself from reciprocity and from exchange by practicing the gift with abandon. Might we be able to reconstitute against the assimilation of political autonomy to independence in the economy, to reconstitute the logic of the gift? Indeed, the logic of the gift cannot be understood if we stick to the sociological and ethnological model of the gift given by Marcel Mauss and criticized by Jacques Derrida. So I overlook this technical discussion and come to the central point. If we want to consider the logic of the gift, we have first to establish that the gift does not derive from the exchange, is not a special case of the economical exchange, but distinguish itself from the exchange, freeing itself from all the terms of the exchange. And we can demonstrate this briefly, but we have to make those three remarks by showing that the exchange implies three terms. The giver, the one who starts the exchange, and the receiver of the exchange, and the term of the exchange. What is exchange? The thing. And if we suppress one of those terms, there is no exchange left. There is no economy. The central point is that in the gift, you can suppress each of those three terms and the gift remains working and alive. It's the reason, it is why the gift cannot be seen as a special case of the exchange. Let us take explain those 3 points. A gift may, first of all, be accomplished by reducing, giving up, the beneficiary of the gifted, the receiver, the gifted. Such is the case in the common experience of giving without knowing to whom one is giving. For example, when I give to an association or through the intermediary of a non-governmental organization, which is where it is precisely because we do not know to whom we are giving that we are able to give in a more efficient manner. This anonymity of the beneficiary of the gift is not only an easy way out for us to give without taking care of the other, but it is also a way to make, because of the anonymity of the beneficiary, our gift much more efficient and much more universal. When we give ourselves to someone who has not asked us for anything, or to someone who we know will remain ungrateful or even reproach us for this gift, and when we nevertheless give it, our gift becomes all the more visible because of this. So the fact that we can give to someone which is not known or who would not thank us for this gift makes our gift not invalid but more visible and more obvious. So the first characteristic of the gift is that the gift is not connected to the presupposition of the beneficiary of the gift. So it is not an exchange. A gift may also appear as perfectly fulfilled without anyone giving it. The most striking example of this absence of the giver comes in the form of the gift given by someone who is dead, the case of inheritance, where only the definitive absence of the giver allows the gift to take place, where from the rule that the best giver is one who is not, who, if not dead, then at least remains absent. For in such scenario, there will be no exchange, because there will be no possible return to life of the giver in order to receive this exchange. And there is more. This gift may be revealed to be perfectly unjust if it comes to someone who has no need of it whatsoever, or whom the disease has detested and hated. But precisely this releases the gift from all interest calculation. From this point on, without interest, it tears itself away from exchange. In this way, we recover the formulation of the ancient Greeks that, quote, gods are without envy, a formulation that is biblical as well, where in Matthew, Gospel according to Matthew chapter 5, God caused his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and send rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. The gift liberates itself from all interest, the form of this disinterestedness, all to the fact that there is no more visible giver. In this way, as the giver disappears, he or she always gives at a loss. And the more it he or she gives at a loss, the more the pure gift appears. Finally, here comes the third reduction. In order to explain it, let us take the example provided by St. Augustine of a woman who would receive a ring from a lover, and having received it, would say, "Thank you, I will keep the ring, but we will no longer marry." Reasoning this way, the lady would act as though the man has given her a ring and nothing more. Yet, he would have seen the ring, the lover, quite differently. He would have thought that by putting the ring on her finger, he was giving himself to her, and vice versa, she to him. Although the piece of jewelry in itself would have certainly had some kind of price, its value would have consisted, in fact, in the gift of the self of the lover to the beloved person, not in the value of the ring. In the same way, in the majority of our gifts, what is important is never located in that which we give as an object, but rather in that which comes with it, in the accident which accompanies it. When I want someone to like me, the thing that I give them represents that which I cannot give them in the form of a thing. It serves only as a substitute, a sign of the affection, which I would like to demonstrate to them, which I can't, because my love is not something I can give. And the more the real gift grows, the more, to some extent, that which symbolizes it attenuates. Let us suppose that one takes possession of a society, of a big building. In order to do so, one goes before a notary public and signs a contract. The taking of possession, the signature, has nothing in common with the effectivity of that which one comes to possess in this way. When someone becomes the President of the Republic or the President of the United States, what does he or she receive? Indeed, power. But concretely, such is only a matter of what? A collar, a medal, a nuclear code, whereas the thing itself, power, remains invisible, immaterial, and non-objectivable. That which is given is never proportionate to the sign. The sign, which alone is transmitted as an object. The more considerable the gift is, the more immaterial it becomes. When people suffer from destitution and we give them something to eat, to drink, a lodging, a dwelling, we do indeed give something, but in fact we give them life, not simply bread, water, of covering or shelter. We only give medication in order to survive an illness, in short, life. Life gives itself in giving something other than itself, and this other thing would have no value if it did not allow someone to remain alive, which is a true gift. Giving one's time, one's life, one's love, in the strict sense, this gives nothing, accomplishes nothing. What one gives, then, is not identical to an object. The more that which one gives is essential, the less real it is, and only gift without importance perfectly coincide with an object. Thus, the gift manifests its paradox. It has no need of the term of exchange whatsoever in order to appear as such. On the contrary, it only appears as such if the terms of the exchange can be removed from it. What happened in the gift? It unveiled itself as the logic of the advance in economic sense, which one might also identify with the logic of the erotic phenomenon. So, we understand better the meaning of the common good. To sum it up, the common good is one of the collective answers to nihilism. Nihilism culminates in the impossibility to will something different from my own will. That is, to repeat the permanence of my own presence without opening any escape and any access to any real thing different from myself. So the challenge of nihilism is not to will, but to will something different from my will. And it's why the question of the common good is so important. Because the common good imposes the possibility and the concept of willing something which is not mine and should never become mine. So how is it possible to will, to desire something which cannot be my property? This is the political and non-political challenge of the common good. But how is it possible to will something different from myself? How is it possible to do that? For a Christian, the answer is quite obvious. It is precisely to do what Christ has done. That is, to will another will than my own will. Again, the standard definition of nihilism according to Nietzsche. That is, the will to power, which is not able to will anything but its own will. In a concrete way, we can refer, to explain this, to the postulation of the common good with the three different meanings described by Gaston Fessard in his central book on authority and common good. But we have also to back this description of the common good made by Fessard, and some others indeed, by the reversion of the economical definition of man. That is, if we are doomed in nihilism to will our own will, it's because the ideal of metaphysics is the autonomy, that is, self-possession. I am identical to myself because I can possess myself. And this is autonomy, which is also an economical definition of subjectivity. How is it possible to describe in a concrete way an approach to the thing in the world which would not imply and end up into possession? This is here that the logic of the gift appears as crucial. The logic of the gift is the concrete experience that we can be related to something else, not only without possessing itself. We can be related to something, according to the logic of the gift, only if we give up any attempt to possess itself. Thus, what makes the gift strange and fascinating is that we experience that when we don't possess, when we give up, it is at that moment that we can receive what we have given up. The logic of the gift, in all its dimensions, is, in fact, the concrete model for a non-nihilistic approach to our will and to our relation to the world. And in this context, the question of the common good becomes far more important than a political issue. The common good is a way to experiment within the social condition of any human being another logic than the logic of nihilism. So it is in the field of political philosophy or theology a much more crucial issue than politics or even, than a political question. I thank you very much for your attention.
So we have Tarek will moderate some discussion. We started a bit late, so if you need to go home, we will not be offended at this stage. I think hopefully we can take maybe 15 minutes or more, and the discussion is keep going perhaps a little longer for discussion. So if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and Tarek can recognize you.
Thank you very much for this very stimulating lecture. What you said about value, I thought was very, not only valuable, but good. The nihilistic implication of calling something a value, because you reduce it to what the one evaluating says. Could a way to escape this nihilism be maybe a little bit shorter than the way that you laid out? If you say, if you stop there and say, no, we turn this relation around, and we say, no, the goodness of something comes not from the evaluator. So to see something as good is not to order it to my self-preservation, but the opposite. So for an example, in the De Doctrina Christiana, Augustine gives the example of the fans of an actor in the theater. And he says these people, if they see an actor who's very good, a very good actor, they don't want to possess him for themselves, but they want to tell everyone else about him and want his goodness to be seen by everyone. Maybe this is a shorter way to come to the same conclusion.
Yes, but perhaps too short. The fact is that today we can reduce everything to an evaluation. This was first achieved precisely in stock exchange for material goods. But now we are in a period of political elections. And political elections are just about evaluation. Polls are nothing else. So it is the public opinion, and the public opinion should be evaluated and manipulated. Now we used to take action about human life according to the value of human life, financial value, ethical value, and so on. The moral standards are now a question of evaluation. So I ask the question, is there today any exception to the universality of the power and empire of evaluation? Even the question of the existence of God. The question of the existence of God is now a question of evaluation. And in this university, there is a great philosopher who is discussing the evaluation of the probability of the existence of God. So I'm not certain that we can point out any issue, any field where truth and falsity cannot be evaluated. And we are after, not only after virtue, but after truth. And this is precisely what was forecast by Nietzsche. We are beyond good and evil, we are beyond truth and falsity. And I agree with you, we should not admit this for granted. We have to fight back if we can, but how? So I think really the point is to go beyond the ideal of increasing our power of evaluation, that is beyond the Wille zur Macht, the Wille zur Wille, the will for itself. And it is here that I think that the model of Christ is astonishingly fascinating. Because you can say the Passion of Christ is just about this, not to do my own will. And nihilism can be defined, the impossibility to do anything but my own will. That's the choice. And all our spiritual life, but I would say a large part of our intellectual life is about this. Is it possible? In the past, perhaps the question was everyone longing and desiring to achieve his own will. But now, today, it is much more difficult not to achieve your own will than to achieve your own will. Because everything is organized to allow us to be able at any moment, in any circumstances, to do what we want. To the point that we don't want enough to match all the possibility to achieve our wills. We are so much connected. We can do anything, but what? So the problem is how to be free from my own will. And the fact that the common good was neglected, it was neglected because it looks stupid that to be free is not to achieve the common good, but my own good. That's so obvious. But this is a trap. That is, if I am doomed to will what I want, I am my own slave. And there is no way out. So the parallel of Christ Nietzsche, for instance, as a way to refrain from self-affirmation and so on. Now, we have to refrain from self-affirmation because self-affirmation is making myself my own slave. So, the paradox of Christ is the paradox of being free from the Villette-sur-Marne. And so the political issue of the common good becomes crucial at that moment. It is not a question of morality. It is a question of freedom.
So my question is if you've made the bar to get to the common good too high. So by running it through the logic of gift. And it may be that I'm misunderstanding you, in which case, correct me. But as I take it, by coming at this through the logic of gift, you have to renounce the desire to possess the thing. And so the gift, so this strikes me as in contrast with some of the kind of Thomistic discussion in the previous section, where the common good is precisely something that you don't lose by sharing it. So you maintain the desire to possess it, but you sort of share that desire in something maybe like the theater or some other way. And in fact, you sort of realize your desire more fully. The desire you have to possess that good is realized more fully by sharing it or something like this. So first of all, I'm wondering whether that's true, whether you do need to be moving away from that other definition, that other kind of logic of the common good that's not a logic of sort of renunciation in how I was reading your take on the gift. And if it is true, whether that actually makes it more difficult to convince these nihilists to believe in the common good, because now they don't just have to sort of expand their sense of what it means to possess something and start to think about the kinds of goods that you could possess without losing, you could share with others without losing your own possession of them. And whether what you have to now do, you have to convince them like, oh no, you actually have to renounce yourself. You have to renounce yourself to get to the common goal.
The paradox of the will to power is that the will to power is like a bicycle or revolution, according to Lenin. It has to grow, to go faster, to stay in equilibrium. So there is no will to power without being increased at any time. So apparently you get more power and you possess more by using the logic of the will to power. The result is that you just stay the same. That is, you have to increase, but you increase the will to power. So I insist on the fact that what we call growth today has no content. It is neither economical, financial, this is growth for the sake of growth, will for the sake of will. So it is the illusion of increasing yourself. You just stay the same. The standard view of being, according to metaphysics, perseverare in suo esse. In the logic of the gift, apparently you lose. In the gift you lose. If you enter the road of the gift, those who don't will tell you that you have to give up something to lose something. The real experience of the gift is that you will not be paid back, but you will start to follow a logic where there will be something unexpected coming. And it's why in the activity of art, of sport, theoretic phenomenon indeed, and many other things, you give up without knowing the result, and it is because you do that that it is not impossible that something unexpected may come upon you and overflow your expectations. So apparently it is a logic where you have you are doomed to lose everything, but it is the only way so there is no contradiction. I would say, so let us go back to the common good, to see whether I put it too high or too low. I think in the history of a nation, when this nation is can build itself seriously and become steady for a long time. It is only when this nation, this community, was able to go through a world crisis, where it was a question of life or death. And if this is done once, twice, 3 times a century, that is, if those people in the majority have agreed to choose the common good rather the sum of all particular goods, they may survive. If not, they will not survive. And I think that in all our nation, it is exactly the issue now. If we make our political decision just by calculating, adding all the particular interest and comes and follow the indication given by the final sum, we shall die. If we are able to go beyond that and to shift, to jump, to lead up to the common good, at the end, what is the common good? The common good is the decision to make a community, or to be made by a community. And this is of another order. At that moment, you get more than you gave up.
I guess I'm just wondering why you even need the apparent renunciation. So when you give the gift of truth to me, to us in this lecture, was there a renunciation on your part of that truth? It seems like not, right? And that seems to be the paradigm of the common good.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
No, but very good example. But there is no renunciation, because I don't, provided I say something true, and provided you agree. So there is a double truth, and nothing is lost by me, and you are not under my control because you agree with me. Okay, but I have had to follow the logic of the gift to do that. Because you could say, this is I have some information, they are the right information, they give me power, so I keep it for me. And it is the way we are told we should behave in the case when we have accumulation of data. So all information are not supposed to be given to everyone. So the question of free access to information is a very serious political and economical issue. So there is a gift. That's the first point. And there is something more obvious for me, is that when you decide to teach, and to make your thought public. It is a chance, because you can be wrong, you can fail, you can be ridiculous, you can come to a conference and be so stupid, be completely out of the point, and you are done. And as I'm doing this time to time, I never take that for granted. So there is even if there is no rivalry and no what is the other exclusivity, nevertheless there is, you have to give.
We are running, unfortunately, out of time, so why don't we, in the sake of getting sort of furthering, hopefully, our discussions, not in a common way, but in a private way, maybe we can get some questions out so people can think about them, and then we're going to have to adjourn because, so if you have a question, we can if you have a question that you'd like to sort of put, perhaps you could talk to Professor Marion later, or just give it to us to stimulate some, so if you have more questions, please raise your hand and pose the questions, we'll collect them, and then we'll have to adjourn. Does that make sense? So go ahead and throw them out there.
You might have said this, but does the logic of the gift require something like Locke's theory of private property, or some theory of property? That's my question. Because how a gift, someone has to give it. Which, sorry, that's my
All right, great. We'll just get a few more out there.
Your argument makes sense to me insofar as you talk about the logical step in the argument being requiring a logic of the gift, but I wasn't sure whether or not the logic of the gift itself merely as an imitation of the communion of the Trinity does enough work to bring it about in reality. So it seems to me that maybe something more like a participation versus an imitation insofar as like the actual experience of gift has to be the ground rather than merely a logic. So rather than imitating an idea, a participation based on a receiving of a gift.
Anyone else like to throw some questions out there? Yes?
You said that the logic of gift is for Christians very understandable. What about non-Christians?
My question touches on his. So community used to be essential to survival and to happiness. That was something that, at least from my perception of history, is that people used to rely on community and realize its value. And being banished from a community in particular used to be a very real form of punishment. But it almost feels like now that we're born into and encouraged into almost like a banished state. You know, we're encouraged towards idealizing independence and personal indulgence and an inflated sense of private property. How would you market the gift to a person who has grown up in that culture? Like, how would you sell the gift to the everyday citizen in that? So.
There's a paradox right there.
How does the logic of the gift as it's incarnated in art relate to the logic of the gift of the common good insofar as, under the understanding that art is given with no expectation of return by the artist?
Very good. Well, please join me in thanking Professor Marion.